back to another episode of Main Street Mental Health. This is Shannon Paul, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker and professional counselor, as well as substance use professional in the state of Wisconsin. And today we're going to talk a little bit about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, um, uh, and maybe dispel a couple myths about it, but also I want to give you really kind of 15 different interventions that can help with not only children, but I think adults can adapt some of these ideas to their own lives and their daily routines and that sort of thing. So, yeah, with no further ado, we'll get started on that. And just a couple things to discuss about ADHD in itself. There's definitely a chunk of the country or the world that either is unaware of ADHD or the types of symptomology that they might experience, that sort of thing, um, or they might just discard it and disagree with it as a psychiatric, neurological, biologically based disorder. I think the overwhelming amount of research and let alone anecdotal experiences that millions of people have experienced over a long, long period of time, decades and decades, that this has been kind of identified and researched, indicates that it is a real condition. It's biologically based, it's neurologically based. It tends to be genetic, so that's another strong component of it. Um, and there's definitely some people out there that have different levels of ADHD. I kind of, when I talk with my clients, I talk about mild, moderate, and severe as being kind of the range that they'll see it, and how it impacts their life and how it affects their lives. I think as children, it might be more evident and show itself a little bit more apparently as they're going through their daily lives, whether it's community, school, home, that sort of thing. Although there's some, age appropriate kind of levels of behaviors and issues and things like that that are pretty normal. So sometimes you have to discern between the two. Um, and I will say that the research says there's about 9 to 10% of the population that would be diagnosed according to the DSM-5, diagnostic statistical manual used for psychiatric assessment and diagnosis evaluation. And so it's a pretty sizable chunk of people. We're talking 30 million people right there, that would fit the criteria for this diagnosis. So it is a substantial amount of individuals that are experiencing these things. Again, probably from a mild level to moderate to a severe level. So, I always point out they have brain scans called PET scans, positron emission topography scans that really show it. If you get a chance, there's definitely some on the web, and just search that PET scans for ADHD, and you'll see the differences in there's some that measure like glucose level where it's being utilized, activity level in the brain, which I think the PET scans focus on activity. And it really indicates some differences between your ADHD individual and your normal or control individual without that particular concern. Basically, what it shows is the back of the brain and the sides of the brain are very active for an ADHD individual in normal situations, versus a person that maybe isn't ADHD. Their frontal lobe is much more active. The amazing thing is the typical course of treatment, which not everybody's supportive of, but there's probably certain individuals that can benefit from certain medications, maybe even supplements as well. We won't get into that today, but um, is after medication is introduced, those PET scans change in the ADHD brain and it goes to the frontal lobe. So that's the unique thing about giving a stimulant to a hyperactive 10-year-old, you would think it would be the opposite effect. It would, it is the opposite effect. You'd think it would be somebody, it would add to their hyperactivity or hyperagitation, and it actually, kind of stimulates the frontal lobe. So focus, governance, control, rational thinking are all amplified to normal levels. So it is quite amazing if you can get a chance to look at those scans. It's worth looking at. Um, there the one thing that when I talk to clients that I indicate with ADHD is the most consistent thing with ADHD is inconsistency. And the reason I say that, there's going to be days, hours where performance, behaviors, words are right spot on. And then an hour later, a day later, a week later, they don't have that wherewithal, that consistency of behavior, action, word, typically. Just inconsistent. They could be more tired, they could be this, that, so on and so forth. And that's one of the frustrating things from a parent standpoint, as well as the individual. I would concur with that, as a person with ADHD, probably a mild level, thankfully. And you'll see some ADHD individuals, and I would be one of them, that have hyper focus abilities where they can really zero in on something and really, really attend to something for a long period of time if they're interested. That's usually the preferred activity kind of a thing. To very, very little focus at all. So concentration is really bouncing from thing to thing. The old ping pong balls going everywhere. And there could be a lot of influences to that. We'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward. Yeah, and again, that's the frustrating thing. I think over time, there used to be some research that supported about 4 to 5% of the population, the adult population, having ADHD. My personal opinion on that, and I don't have anything to back this up, but I think it's just as you get older, you develop your own personal skills, your mitigation skills to kind of counter the ADHD symptomology, and so it shows itself less. It doesn't interfere as much, so on and so forth. So I think that's probably why diagnostically you might not qualify, but I think there's still a neurological, biological thing present. It's just that we're better at it, at kind of taking care of it and managing it. So um, the unique thing about, as time has gone on, ADHD, it's getting more research and so on and so forth. And basically the DSM-5 indicates three subtypes. And those are, your combined type, which is hyperactivity and inattentiveness. Um, then there's the primarily inattentive type, and then a primarily hyperactive type. Excuse me. You might see the inattentive type a bit more, probably in the female population. Um, as time goes on, I'm sure the research will maybe balance this out. But right now, it's about a 4-to-1 ratio for that diagnosis. I don't know if that's changed over the last few years, but my guess is it will. But yeah, time will tell on that. You generally you notice the boys. Those are the ones. They're the ones that are a little bit more hyperkinetic and energetic. Um, then there's some newer kind of approaches and theories and some research that's saying there's actually 7 subtypes of ADHD, which gets more complicated. For an ADHD mind, it gets complicated too. But they vary in different styles and so on and so forth. So it's sort of an enigma, but I think we're starting to get a little bit more better handle on it. And it might not look the same, person to person, but there's definitely some common symptomology. So our top 15, in no particular order, interventions that you can look at, that might be helpful. They might be helpful for any child, for that matter. Children with other concerns, depression, anxiety, that might be helpful anyway, shape or form. But these are kind of particularly picked out for ADHD symptomology. And I will start it off. My number one is use a visual component. Whenever you're giving instructions, directions, reminders, things like that. If it could be having a marker board. It could be post-it notes. Again, I'm big on post-it notes and notes to myself, making lists, visual writing it. I think that tactile piece helps it too. Um, Keywords on a marker board. Sometimes you don't have to write the whole thing up, but just one word, one little symbol, that person with ADHD sees it. Oh yeah, I got to do that, or I got to remember that. So keep that in mind. Visual kind of things. Sometimes using nonverbals when talking. A big one that I used to do, and I did some more direct, like group work or day treatment services, that sort of thing, was I'd do a lot of hand signals. I'd kind of this one to calm down. I wouldn't necessarily calm down, Jimmy. It was more, just kind of putting your hand like that and just kind of give that indication of, oh yeah, I gotta relax. I gotta focus, or whatever it might be, whatever that hand signal would be, that they knew ahead of time that could be helpful. Um, Sometimes role playing can be real helpful too, and that's a real visual, auditory, physical kind of interaction that really can be helpful at learning new skills, or reinforcing skills that maybe have been taught before. So keep that in mind. Use a visual component. That's number one. Number two, this one I really stress with parents. And then if you're an adult with ADHD, this would be for partners. And those would be basically use touch. So touch. They call it the royal road to the brain. And I would concur with this one 100%. Number one, my sensory needs, touch, very sensitive to different types of materials, um, startles, somebody come up from behind or touching, a loud sound, whatever it might be. Sensory stuff is always, for a lot of people with ADHD, it's very noticeable and very heightened. So touch itself is so important. What you might try verbally to do, give instructions, directions, reminders, the chances of success with an ADHD 10-year-old, as most parents would know, yeah, you might have to repeat it 3 times, you might have to repeat it 10 times, you might have to yell at one time, you might have to, whatever. And my encouragement always is get closer to and use touch when giving directions. So, Jimmy, I really need you to pick up your shoes, and put them in the pantry, or excuse me, put them in the mudroom. And use touch in that situation. Getting in front of, squaring off, in that situation can be so powerful. I don't know what the research shows on the effectiveness of communication, with ADHD individuals. My guess is it's twice as good. If I had to say, if I had a hypothesis, I would say it's that much better to use touch. So use touch, whether it's holding a hand, rubbing the back and saying, Jimmy, I really need you to do that. It's going to increase the odds. Normally, what happens a lot of times when I give this instruction, it's, that touch is just bing, I mean, it's just like a connection that, electrical almost, like you have my attention now, so keep that in mind. Um, Here's another one, utilizing rhythmic motion, when memorizing or reading. Um, Pacing or riding a stationary bike, walking a treadmill. Reading often is very, very challenging, especially for extended period of time for people with ADHD. That's me. And if I could read 10 minutes, I was doing pretty good. Unfortunately, I found this out later in my later in my educational career. After my educational career, actually, I was riding a stationary bike, and I read 40 pages of a professional book, and the 20 minutes or whatever I was on the bike, and I was just stunned that I had that amount of time put into this book. I read 40 something pages. Never have done that probably before. And the next day I was using that information, in sessions. So it was very eye-opening to me. And I think that rhythmic motion, whether it's walking, whether it's biking, it might be wiggling a leg at least if you don't have access to those other things. Keep that in mind as well. So use rhythmic motion when trying to memorize and or read things. So keep that. That's number three. Number four, use special language, very concrete, to help with social skills. My favorite one, I just did this one yesterday. with a client, and I call it the Goldilocks technique. It's been out there obviously a long time, but if you remember the story of Goldilocks, she drank the porridge from the three bears, and one was too cold, and one was too hot, and one was just right. So whenever I try to teach a social skill or a behavior, I'll give the example, sort of role play the example of too cold, too hot, just right. And then that's my language. I use that a lot of times too. This young man I was working with, a 8-year-old, 9-year-old boy, he was saying my words. Was that just right? Shortly thereafter. So it might be, and the example I give usually, and I apologize for the loudness, and I won't do it as loud as I normally do, but it's like, hi, how the heck are you? And kind of grab their hand or really shake it. And then I'd do the real kind of too cold. That was too hot. Too cold would be kind of that, hey, hi, and then hi, I'm Shannon, and that being just right. So indicating that. So you can do that for a variety of different things. We were doing it how he treats his younger sister, and gave kind of like too much, too little, just right. So keep that in mind. That special that kind of showing those extremes is very, very good. Education for the they get to visually and auditorily and physically do it. So keep that in mind. That's number four. Number five, structure of the environment is very important for children as well as adults for ADHD. Placement of your everyday objects need to be in a consistent place. The big example for adults is keys. Where do you put your keys? So keep that in mind. I utilize near my shoes because obviously the shoes are typically, one of the last things you might put on before you leave for the day. So I put things near that, sometimes in the shoe, sometimes on the shoes or next to the shoes if I need to bring it. So it really helps increase my odds. So something to consider. Number six, they talk about chunking chores. So if you have chores, sometimes when any child or any adult, when they hear, hey, could you do this? It's Mount Everest. It's so big. It's like that's way too much. So maybe just work on that first base camp, whatever base camp is on Mount Everest, and say that's where you want to get to. So whatever that chunk is, it's, hey, could you go get your clothes from your room and bring them down here, versus doing the laundry or whatever it might be. So yeah, chunking chores, and you can use charts to monitor that instead of like one box for one big chore. It could be little boxes for smaller pieces and steps, incremental steps to that larger chore. Each of those maybe gets a reward or gets a star or some sort of indication. I think we were using foam stars for my youngest daughter for some behaviors she was working on, and she loved it. She wanted to be the one to put that on there, so it really worked for her. So chunking things. When traveling, you probably know this. Keeping hands busy, cards, coloring, fidgets, snacks. It's another thing too. A lot of times, I think even all kids when they're hungry or tired, their behaviors are going to ramp up typically. So it's good to keep snacks available, something to munch on. I'll probably promote high protein to that too, which I might talk about a little bit, but the higher the protein, probably better. Bedtime snacks. Speaking of what I was just talking about, there is some research. This is older research, but it talks about that we go often from like around 6 o'clock in the evening until sometimes noon the next day without any protein. You think about that, and it's like, huh, really? And often it is, unless you have a pretty large breakfast, which a lot of us don't, especially children on school days. Um, there's not much protein going on, so there's some indication that protein levels drop, and then that makes mornings more difficult with individuals with ADHD. So a snack 15 minutes before bedtime, heavier in protein, whether it's cottage cheese, peanut butter, protein shake, whatever it might be. Higher the protein, the better. So keep that in mind. That's number 8. Number 9. This is kind of like related to the other one, setting things out that you need the night before. Some people will record their voice for reminders. So they'll say, in the morning, I need to bring X, Y, and Z. And then the morning they play that, they put that tape right next to their shoes or next to their book bag or whatever, and they play it. And then they, oh yeah, I got to get that. I need to bring that. I need that today. Um, so keep that in mind as well. So set things out for reminders. You can do that for chores as well. Um, Number 10, bedtime. Um, Showers and back rubs can be helpful with relaxation if there's some getting to sleep difficulties, which some people have. Some people, it's kind of like 100 miles an hour, whomp, and they're down and they're sleeping like rocks. But there's definitely a share of ADHD individuals that toss and turn, really don't have much downtime. And if you can get 4, 5 good hours of sleep, sometimes that's a lot. But sleep hygiene is very important. We'll get to that in other episodes. But could be back rubs, could be showers. There's something about the warmth of water that helps with relaxation. So keep that in mind. Use a nightlight if needed. Some individuals like total blackout, everything's black, so on and so forth. I would say the most important thing that I've noticed anecdotally and personally is I do need white noise. So I need some sort of background noise. When I was younger, it was music. The old radios that put the sleep on and it'd play for 59 minutes, and I was usually asleep by the end of that. So music was kind of my white noise at that time. Now I use a fan, and I really recommend people using that, or even those machines or your phone. They're really, really, really helpful. I think it's soothing. Um, instead of watching a whole lot of active TV right before bed, probably not a good idea because it kind of stimulates the brain. So maybe some downtime of screen time before sleep would be important as well. So keep that in mind. Um, yeah, number 11. This is kind of a little bit larger picture one, but the one issue that pops up for a number of individuals with ADHD as they get a little bit older is they've been really um, you know behaviorally disciplined or consequenced for much of their life. They've heard no and stop that and don't do that more than most kids. Um, they can develop a little hardened shell to that after a while. um, and they almost like, wow, they just did that on purpose, and they didn't care about the individual that they might have been affecting at that time. So I think conscience development is a really key thing for parents to really instill in their kids. And I think it's really important for ADHD kids. It's important for everybody, but it's really important for ADHD kids. It helps promote ownership of mistakes or poor behavior, and teach appropriate apology and amends skills. So keep that in mind. Apology with an amends, much more powerful than just apology alone. I usually suggest or encourage people to apologize later. Maybe do that quick, you know, surface apology at first, but then later on come in with, I'm really sorry for what I did, XYZ, and hope you can forgive me or whatever. But really at a sober moment, meaning an emotionally normal moment, kind of saying, you know, my brother, my sister, whoever, my friend, my parent, I'm sorry for doing that. And that I think is a really powerful thing. Um, and then making amends. So, for a lot of times siblings, we get a lot of sibling issues. It might be, uh, I'll do your chore tomorrow for calling you a name yesterday, something like that. Nothing outrageously different, something that matches to whatever the, you know, behavior was. So keep that in mind. Conscience development, very important. Um, let's see. Yeah, I think that's um, a really, that's number 11 so far. So keep that in mind. Um, we are looking at number 12, and 12, yeah, um, learning a new approach to things. It might be learning, this is where you can kind of do your Goldilocks, where you're kind of showing too much, just right, just, too much, too hot, or too cold, too hot, just right. And it can be a really, really good time for that too, as on top of, promoting the apology in amends. So keep that in mind as well. It's a great time to install a new behavior. Um, I think it's important for the parent during these times, as hard as it is to try to remain calm, almost, emotionally just kind of honest. It might be matter of fact honesty, like that really hurt, or that was really disappointed, or I was scared, or, things like that. Um, I mean, if they do apology and amends, sometimes you can reward that because that's a very pro-social thing to do. Coming out of a behavior a misbehavior that might be kind of a cool thing to see happen is this, wow, but your response to your misbehavior was fantastic. You know what? We're going to reward you for that. So it might be, more privileges or getting privileges back, or, whatever it might be. So, um, there's another one. I believe we're up to number 13, I think. Hopefully I got that right. Pair off with each child in your family. If you have multiple children, it's good to spend, that 15, 30 minutes a week one-on-one. Um, in my field, the one-on-one relationship is really what we promote, and really all walks of the professions and types of services that we provide is one-on-one, long term, typically a long-term commitment, a year or more. And it's very powerful, just that consistent. I know I get to hang out with mom or dad for a half hour, once a week. I know that's going to happen. It's a given, and it's not conditional to behaviors. So keep that in mind. A lot of times we'll I'm still mad at you from 3 days ago, therefore we're not going to the movies, or whatever it might be. Don't do that. Try, make sure it's unconditional. Obviously there's things that come up that change your schedules, but really, really, really make a point of installing that in and saying, we're going to have this time together no matter what. And we're going to spend it however we spend it. And that you can kind of use that as an incentive too. It's like, you get to choose the activity this week, or, you had a great week. What are we doing? We're going to double the time. We're going to go for an hour, whatever it might be, but make it unconditional. So, um, I really promote recreational pursuits in that time, or hobbies, interests, that sort of thing, versus homework or things like that. Um, and I usually this is one thing that you'll find a lot with a lot of kids, a lot of people, but competitiveness sometimes can kind of invite conflict. So I usually recommend a non-competitive behavior, or excuse me, activity. Or if you do play a game or whatever it might be, try to tie. Try to make it even as much as possible. Again, it's the activity together. It's not who wins or loses. That's important. So keep that in mind as well. Try to make it, decrease the competitiveness of it. Um, if there are activities that you're doing that you're going to time, or whatever it may be, try to do it together. So like you're on the same team. Make sense? I'm sure it does. Um, yeah, another little component that you see in families, parenting, which we've got a parenting guru that we'll be talking to in future episodes. I can't wait to have him. We might have to divide that one up into about 5 sessions, as he has a lot of information, a lot of experience. He's wonderful to listen to. Um, is and this is something key for parents when you have multiple children, is fairness is not sameness. And I know that might be controversial, but in the end, it makes sense. And what that means is, your responses are tailored to each child. It's customized to that child. So it might, a response, whether it's a positive reinforcement, a negative reinforcement, it might not be exactly the same. So keep that in mind. Is fairness is not necessarily sameness. And I think we struggle with that sometimes as parents. Excuse me. Um, Yeah, and then there's kind of another thing to keep in mind. I think this is number 15. I apologize, I might not have had my numbers correct, but we're around 15. I'll try to give you a bonus one here. Um, Realize the difference between non-compliance and inability. Non-compliance and inability. So often parents really focus on any oppositional behavior and they treat it as you know better and you know what you have to do. And versus, you know, Jimmy might just have forgotten his homework, or he might have just forgotten what he was supposed to bring, or a chore, or whatever it might be. He might have totally spaced it. And if we're treating everything like non-compliance, you tend to get a much more punitive response versus a learning experience, let's say, that it might be. So, and if you do some of those interventions we've already talked about, you might have less of these situations anyway, thankfully. And um, it, it it's it kind of in some ways the inability non-compliant thing kind of releases parents from, okay, it's just something he or she's going to struggle with. It's not their strength. They're challenged with it. Maybe as time goes on, they'll get better at it, but it's more inability than it is non-compliance. And that's kind of a philosophical, but there's some responses to that are real important. If you treat everything non-compliance, it'll be more challenging for parents as well as the kids. And I was talking about that conscious development earlier. If it's just this constant, you know, you didn't get everything 100% correct every day, good luck. I mean, that's it goes back to the first thing or one of the first things I mentioned today about the inconsistency of ADHD. And sometimes inability, neurological, biological, genetic, connections aren't quite working that day, and that hour, whatever it might be, and to really just take that pressure off of perfect parenting, perfect childhood. Again, we're all a percentage of perfect anyways. So I think that can be a helpful thought of when working with ADHD. So um, I I want to point out another thing. This is kind of a bonus one, 15 plus here, is I in my particular field, current kind of role, we do a lot of strength building and capitalizing on strengths. And there's no different when you're working with ADHD kids or adults, is where are their strengths, finding what those are. You could have a person that likes to help and has lots of energy. And if you say sit down and stay still, it might be the opposite of utilizing their strengths, but it might be somebody that, wow, they can help, do more chores. They could clean more. They could have fun with the neighbor kid who doesn't have many friends. You might be able to capitalize on their strengths. I'm just giving some examples there, kind of randomly. That it might it's I've heard it this way many times for many years, is bumblebees looking for flowers. Our role sometimes as caregivers, parents, teachers, providers, is to provide more flowers. So I'll leave you with that. I hope you enjoyed this information. And hopefully in future episodes, we'll talk about some more topics. If you do have more suggestions, feel free to leave comments. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.